Hello, and welcome to Powerful Places Podcast. I'm your host, Gary White, and today we're speaking with Elyn Aviva about her latest novel called The Question. Elyn, you call this novel a magical fable. What do you mean by that?
Oh, well, obviously it's fiction of a sort, and when I had people read earlier drafts of it, it became clear that they weren't quite sure when they started reading it what it was. And since you bring an intention to what you're reading, if you're reading nonfiction, you expect a certain kind of veracity. So I decided to subtitle it A Magical Fable because that's what it is. It's Think of Jorge Luis Borges or Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian writer who writes The Pilgrim and The Alchemist. It's not really magical realism, it's something different. It's drawing on magical realms and the imaginal realm, about which I talk a great deal, to create a story that exists on many levels.
And what is the story about?
Well, the shortest way to talk about it is to say it's about a seer, a seeker, and a scribe. Those are the main characters who carry the narrative along. A narrator who is the seeker, who is lost at the beginning, doesn't know what to do with his or her life, and is seeking something and stumbles across an ad in a very strange bookstore and goes in to a strange room and encounters a seer who is more than a card reader because she actually manifests cards out of the air. She's drawing information in from other realms. And then the scribe, because the story is being told by the seeker at the end of his or her life, and encounters this being who offers to write down the story.
Mm-hmm. And how did you come to write this?
Oh, well, it started, the project started several years ago. I had been at a intense workshop with Robert Moss, who is a master storyteller and shamanic dreamer. And he had asked a question about the big story that's looking for you. And I've been a writer for years. I mean, I've always been a writer. Mm-hmm. But I hadn't written anything longer than short essays for a number of years. And in our books on Powerful Places. And I just sat down one day and started writing the core of the story. That it started with the image of the seer and the seeker, and this fortune teller, storyteller, tarot reader manifesting cards out of the air. And it just went from there, the weaving in what Robert does with dreams, which is to always ask if it were my dream, I would think, rather than imposing one's own explanation onto others. And I thought, well, what if with the card reading it was like that? It's not imposing your reading on somebody, but offering a story to see what matters to them. And that's what happened. And then I spent a couple of years, I put it aside. It seemed finished. These stories came out of the imaginal realm, triggered by looking at cards of many different decks. R.J. Stewart's decks, DreamWork, and John Matthews' decks, Celtic decks, tarot cards, standard tarot reading cards. And interestingly, when I went back to look at the cards for illustration purposes in the book, I found out that only one of those really related to any card I'd ever seen, which was quite intriguing. Anyway, I'm sorry, I've lost the track.
Okay.
I then needed to look for a frame for these stories, and that took a couple of years to find the appropriate frame. And I found finally a frame within a story within a story.
Mm-hmm. So this probably reflects a lot of your own background.
Yes, I've been studying with R.J. Stewart in the Western esoteric tradition for 13 years or more, and I've studied Kabbalah off and on for 13, 14 years, and Kabbalah has an important role in the story as well. I've studied with Robert Moss as well for several years now, ever since I discovered his books.
What would you like for the reader to get from your book?
Oh, I would like the reader to get his or her own story out of the book. I would like it to mean whatever it's going to mean for them. I hope it can be of use for someone who's interested in exploring the imaginal realm, who's interested in exploring what it means to go beyond this apparent physical reality. Perhaps it could be meaningful to someone who's lost and looking for meaning, because that is a central theme in the story, is the seeker who's lost, who wants answers to questions, and learning discernment about what are the most important questions, and how do you live the answers.
You've mentioned the imaginal realm several times, and the first thing that conjures up is imaginary.
Mm-hmm.
You mean more than imaginary.
Yes. I'm not going to give a discourse here. There are a number of important writers and philosophers who have talked about this difference for thousands of years. When we say imaginary, we tend to think of something trivial or totally made up. But, and I'll use this intentionally, in reality, reality is simply much bigger than we imagine. And the imaginal realms are multiple and many and can be explored. And one way one does this is through shamanic journeying, or through Western esoteric traditions, magic perhaps. There are important Sufi writers from the 13th, 14th century, philosophers who have explored these realms in great depth. And Jung, Carl Jung, talks about what would be the imaginal realm. It's not imaginary in the sense of being made up. It's a realm, or realms, that can be explored in depth and that have a great deal of interaction with us in our lives, in our dreams, in our daydreams, and in our journeys.
You've written quite a number of other books. Can you give us an overview of that?
Yes, well, my first book was Following the Milky Way, a pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago in Spain. It was published, I think, in 1987, perhaps by Iowa State University Press, as a travel narrative about my walking the Camino de Santiago across Spain in 1982. I did my PhD in anthropology on the modern Camino de Santiago, and to do that I walked the Camino for part of the research. Later I wrote The Journey, which is a novel of spiritual quest, and has a lot of really, I think, interesting information about sacred geometry and labyrinths and numbers, and there's even a tarot reader in there that appeared out of nowhere while I was working on the book and did very strange things. That is about a woman who is seeking meaning in her life and goes on the Camino. And the novel actually starts at the end of her journey because it was, for her, not very satisfactory. And the novel is about what happens afterwards. I've written other novels and detective stories, and then more recently, you and I have written a series of books called Powerful Places Guidebooks. These, there are, I think, 7 or 8 in all. They're
7, I think, at this point.
Celtic, they're really the Celtic lands, Brittany and Wales and Cornwall and Ireland, and also Caminos de Santiago and
Scotland.
Mm-hmm. And these are not your regular travel books. They are focusing on powerful places and sacred sites, and how to better go deeper, how to experience more fully the energies of these locations. They include maps and information on how to get to places, and they're select locations that may not be in regular guidebooks. I also did something called Where Heaven and Earth Unite, which is a heavily edited series of interviews with a teacher of ours named Ferran Blasco, who is a geomancer par excellence. And I had for years wanted to ask him questions about how these things work. How does a dolmen generate energy? What are we talking about? How do these things actually work? And so I took the opportunity to interview him at length, and Gary made videos of some of these interviews as we went to sacred sites and powerful places, and Ferran led us in a sort of meditation to experience them more fully. And now the question, a magical fable.
You have a Facebook page called Elyn Aviva Writes. I presume that you'd like for your readers to get in touch with you there?
Yes. Well, I was trying to figure out how could people have a conversation about this book, because I really want people to have a place to share. And it seemed like the simplest way to begin was with a Facebook page. So I set up Elyn Aviva Writes for the purpose of conversation about this book, but it's bigger. It includes all of our books, and conversation about anything that I've written, including articles that I publish on blog sites, would be welcome here.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to say about the book?
Writing this book has been a fascinating experience, because it feels like it came through me more than that I wrote it. I feel that it is important to get this information out there into the world. I offer it as a gift. I offer it as an offering of love, and I hope it is very useful to whoever is moved to read it. And I hope to hear from you.
Well, thank you, Elyn. This is a fun interview for me.
Well, without you, this wouldn't have happened. And,
we do work together.
Gary is responsible for the layout and the design, and I think he's just done a brilliant job.
Thank you.
Thank you.